Item number 8, public hearings. We have a public hearing this evening to hold a public hearing to adopt a resolution amending the general plan to allow emergency shelters for the homeless in the industrial land use classification, and waive the first reading and introduce the ordinance adding provisions to the San Bruno Municipal Code related to emergency shelters for the homeless and amending the zoning map of the San Bruno Municipal Code, identifying an emergency shelter overlay district.
Through the chair. Before we begin, been advised by the city attorney that, again, I need to recuse myself for where I live and the topic for this, so maybe this will be the last time, but I'll have to recuse myself.
Thank you.
And through the chair, I have to recuse myself for the same reason. Thank you.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor, City Council members. The purpose of this item is for the City Council to consider amending the zoning code to allow emergency shelters for the homeless in a portion of the M1 Industrial Zoning District. The City Council has discussed this subject several times over the past year or so, both in the process of closing out the prior housing element and also in developing the new housing element, which was adopted by the City Council just in on April 14th. The Planning Commission reviewed this draft ordinance on April 21st, and they have forwarded it to you with a positive recommendation. So now I'll give you a brief background and description of the proposed zoning code amendment. Establishment of an emergency shelter zone is a requirement of state law. Every jurisdiction in California must identify at least one zone where emergency homeless shelters may be permitted by right with sufficient capacity to accommodate the identified local need for emergency shelter beds. San Bruno's identified need is for 32 beds, based on the biannual homeless census. And it's important to note that state law does not require the city to construct a homeless shelter, and also that there are no plans to construct a homeless shelter. This is the last uncompleted implementation action of the prior housing element, and adoption of emergency shelter zoning is also a requirement to receive certification of the recently adopted housing element by the State Department of Housing and Community Development. HCD will issue a qualified certification which will be removed once the city completes this zoning amendment. And it's important to note that a certified housing element is necessary to qualify for various housing, community development, and infrastructure funding, including OBAG funds. So 2 locations were considered during this process. First, the transit-oriented development area along San Bruno Avenue west of the train station and along a portion of El Camino Real. These are commercially zoned properties that were in the transit corridors plan area. At a Planning Commission workshop last year, residents questioned the appropriateness of allowing shelters in proximity to residential neighborhoods and also to the existing 10-bed emergency shelter at St. Bruno's Church. Based on this input, the northern portion of the M1 Industrial District was proposed as an alternative location. This area is approximately 5.5 acres. It's located between San Mateo Avenue and the railroad tracks, and on the south end by Scott Street and a few parcels just south of Scott Street, and north to Tanforan Avenue at the city border. The area was considered to be suitable because of its proximity to public transit and commercial services and separation from residential neighborhoods, with less potential for an impact on residents. The City Council had held a study session in February, received public input, and provided direction to proceed with the M1 district as the preferred location for an emergency shelter zoning. The proposed ordinance will amend the municipal code to do the following. It will add a definition of emergency shelters in the code. It will add emergency shelters as a permitted use within the industrial district. It will add an emergency shelter overlay district and a map, and the map is the map that you see on the screen there. State law also allows the city to require reasonable and objective standards for emergency shelters. The ordinance includes development and performance standards whose purpose is to ensure that the development of emergency shelters does not adversely impact adjacent parcels or the surrounding neighborhood. The emergency shelter overlay includes standards related to parking, the size of the shelter, so not exceeding the 32-bed maximum, which is our identified need, outdoor waiting areas and security, a management plan, length of stay, and lighting. I also want to note that the action tonight includes a general plan text amendment because the general plan does not include emergency shelters as a permitted use in the industrial land use classification, and so that needs to be updated. And that concludes my presentation. Happy to answer any questions.
Okay, any questions of staff at this time? Ken?
Through the chair, did I miss it? But what determines the size? It's 5.5 acres, and how do you determine that it stops where it stops, and then alters up the street and then goes across the property instead of stopping at a street?
Yeah. There are a number of because of the airport, there are a number of restrictions, and there's a safety compatibility zone that runs through that area, and those types of uses are not allowed in that zone. So this is outside of conflicting with any airport compatibility zones. So that's really what determined the southern boundary.
Okay. So there is like a noise contour or something that goes through there?
Yeah, it's not the noise contour. It's actually it's called a safety compatibility
okay.
zone.
Right.
Yeah.
I should know that.
Yeah.
Okay, anything else? All right, at this time, we'll open the public hearing. Anyone from the public like to address the council on this issue?
Russ Steins, Reed. I just wanted to say I didn't get the mailer from the city. I noticed my neighbors got the thing about this here, but I didn't get one in my mailbox, so maybe my 600-foot thing you guys might consider again, make sure that everybody gets mailers in the zones. Thank you.
All right. Anyone else?
Hello. Deborah Adabashi. We're at 101 Atlantic at Montgomery. We are landlords and also business owners here. We have an industrial business, light industrial, custom furniture design, and there's a residence, so we have a mixed-use property. So we have a lot of questions about this project. And we did get the mailer, and that's why we're here. So 32 beds, I have a lot of questions. The capacity, the duration, the genders, the age, the date of completion, and what constitutes an emergency. These are all some questions that I have. Obviously, as a landlord, we have concerns about our residents, even though you're correct in the assessment that there are very few homes in that neighborhood, but there are people living right there. And then there's our business of concern too. We also have a concern about the value of our property and how that will be impacted, if at all. Of course, we're very interested in a shelter, but it will impact how it impacts our business and our living is something of concern to us as well.
Okay. Let me just make a quick comment. First of all, I want to make sure you understand there has been no application to put anything in. There's no drawings. There's nothing. This just has to be an area that's designated by the city by state law. So we're mandated to do this in some part of our city. But there's no application. Nobody's applied for anything at all. I'll let Mark maybe address some of the other issues regarding capacity, gender, those type of things.
Okay, thank you.
If I could interject, a scenario, because we're talking, because she asked a question as far as what constitutes an emergency. So if you can, give some hypothetical.
Well, I think what's important to know is that it's emergency shelters for homeless people. So that's really the definition, is that a person that does not have shelter. So there's no, the ordinance as it's written, there's no distinction between age or sex or anything. It's the criteria is a homeless person. It would depend on what's a nonprofit organization or something, what they might want to do. I mean, there are different types of homeless shelters. There are homeless shelters for families. There are homeless shelters for just single men. So there are different types. But this does not, determine what that is. And
Will this be run by the city or run by a nonprofit?
No, most likely by a nonprofit.
Uh-huh.
Through the
And-
chair.
okay, so
Irene?
Oh,
Sorry.
I just, from your questions, I'm just wondering if it's clear, and maybe for other people as well. The state makes us, in essence, find a place somewhere in our city that we would allow someone to accumulate property and propose to build a shelter. So that's what this setup is, to say, okay, if you're going to come into San Bruno and you want to build a shelter, you can only build it in this area. So that's what this piece is.
Okay, yeah,
If
that's
somebody-
not made clear in that letter. It sounded
Right.
like this is imminent,
Yeah.
and this is happening right now.
No. So that's what, this is like the first step before anybody could come into the city and say, okay, I'm going to build a shelter.
Uh-huh.
And we're telling them as a city, you can only build in this area. So then they say, okay, I'm going to build in this area. Then they have to find the money, buy the land, and then they have to go through planning, and then they have to, so that's the
Understood.
whole
Okay, that's
process.
a lot clearer in terms of
Okay, yeah,
what
this is
capacity
just saying-
and, the immediacy of this project or what is
Right.
actually
No,
being
there is no,
discussed.
there is no project. This is only saying, the state's saying to us, find a place in your city that someday somebody might want to build a shelter, kind of. And we say, okay, we look through our city, and this is the best, least impacted place we could think of.
Understood.
Is that clear?
That's very helpful, thank
Okay.
you.
And other cities are doing the same thing we're doing.
Yeah, everyone has
Larger
to.
cities
I
have larger
understand.
capacity and.
It's
and-
state mandated, yes. So
exactly.
this process has to happen
So
everywhere, so.
there is no project. Right. Okay,
Great,
thank you.
thank you.
Okay, anyone else?
Finale. I live on Montgomery Street. It's so industrial down there. How can they put a shelter in there? Montgomery Street, you can barely get down the street. The garbage truck's going down and everything. I don't see how it's feasible to have it on Montgomery Street. It's a very busy street. Those garbage trucks are going back and forth all the time. It's very dangerous. I don't, like you say, it's not imminent, but it's going to happen. Because this is a designation. You guys chose it, so we're unhappy about it.
Okay. Mark, can you address maybe briefly the process of how we tried to decide what part of the city and the criteria we used to locate this particular area?
Well, first of all, we had to be sure that it could accommodate the full number, which is 32. Secondly, I think being close to transit is an important one. Being close to services is an important one. And certainly, safety obviously is very important, and that's where I think management is extremely important. So part of our performance standards and development standards requires a management plan and a security plan that the city would review and the community director would endorse before you could open a shelter. So this area also, and then impact on neighborhoods, and there's no perfect location. So I think what we looked for was the area that would have the least impact, and this is the area that we came up with.
Okay, but all of that being said, if someone came in and said, this is what I'd like to do, they still have to go through quite a process.
Yeah.
To get this approved.
Yes.
Right, okay, thank you.
Good evening.
Tell us your name and your street.
Antoine Adabashi, 1193 Montgomery. You said that you looked for an area that has services. This area has absolutely no services. There's no restaurants, no coffee shops, no drugstores. There's nothing but trucks and businesses that are manufacturing or repairing cars, and homeless don't need that service. And they need either public transportation. There's no buses that go by there. There's a 20-minute walk to the BART station. And I don't know what services you talk about other than the trash company and the body shops. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's not a perfect solution. We have Safe Harbor that is run by the county, I believe sponsored by Samaritan House, and they're way up there by the airport. And their only service is Samtrans buses. If, say, Samaritan House were to pinpoint San Bruno as a potential site for a 32-bed homeless shelter, they would probably come forward and look at one of the existing buildings that they would convert, maybe a 25 by 100 foot parcel, and make an application with the city and come to the planning commission, or make an application with the planning department. Staff would review it. Notices would go out. There would probably be neighborhood meetings regarding the potential, and you would get noticed for that. Everyone within, I believe, 500 feet would get notice. And that's the process. And it is, because it's an allowed use, it would get that added consideration versus a residential area. But it doesn't mean that it's a guaranteed use. So your comments as far as safety and no services and inability for the homeless to operate there, would be taken in consideration, and they may not get it approved. So it's not imminent. It's not imminent. It is just like any other, say, take for example, a auto repair shop in another part of a commercial area. If it's not something that the city believes it's, or the neighbors believe that it's, conducive to that area, it would not get approved, even though it might be allowed. So I hope I did a good characterization, so that they can see that, it's still a long road, and it would have to be a significant nonprofit to come forward to lease or purchase a property to set up something like this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it is within a third of a mile of the BART station. It's within a little more than a third of a mile down to downtown. But it's a walk, but it's manageable.
There's no perfect location. You look at other areas of the city, and those people around there would have the same concerns you would have, I'm sure. It's more of an industrial area, you're right. But this is the process we're going through here tonight, is going to dictate another process. Should someone actually come forward and try to apply for something, there's a whole myriad of things that they have to do to get anything approved. And a big part of that is reaching out to the local people within a certain radius. So you'll have your say, but there's no plans. Nobody's even approached us about trying to do anything. This is just something we have to set up in place. So you should know that. Anything else in the public hearing? If we close the public hearing, you're precluded from discussing this with us again. Okay. Motion to close?
So moved.
Second.
Motion and second to close the public hearing. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Any further discussion or action by the council?
I'll introduce the resolution.
We're looking, I believe, to
Do we need to
waive the first reading? Right.
Move that we waive the first reading.
Second.
Motion and second to waive the first reading. All in favor?
Aye. Now on to this resolution.
Councilmember O'Connell.
Aye.
Councilmember Ibera.
Aye.
Mayor Ruane.
Aye. And then do we need to introduce the ordinance too, Mark?
It's adopting a resolution amending the general plan.
Correct.
That's correct.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
So we're done?
So the motion would be to introduce or to adopt the resolution.
We did that.
Oh,
But we wanted to waive the first reading and introduce the ordinance first, I guess, huh? Is that right? Or
the action in front of you is a resolution, not an
okay,
ordinance.
then that's
There's an
done.
ordinance.
Oh, there is?
There is an
Resolution
ordinance.
And an ordinance.
Sorry, the title didn't, yes, and introduce an ordinance. I apologize, I'm obviously not paying attention.
Okay.
So
You'll also introduce the ordinance, Irene?
I'll also introduce the ordinance.
Councilmember O'Connell.
Aye.
Councilmember Ibera.
Aye.
Mayor Ruane.
Aye. Okay, so we waive the first reading, introduce the ordinance, and introduce the resolution. Good? Great, okay, thank you.
Uh-oh.
Yes, Mark?
Adopt the resolution.
We did that.
Did we do
We
that?
just did that out of order, that's all.
I'm sorry.